Hey, CG Geek, I challenge you. Personally, I challenge you.
A challenge? Well, consider your challenge accepted, Clinton Jones. So here's what's going on. There's an epic 3D contest going on right now. It's called Alternate Realities, and it's being hosted by Clint, former member of Quarter Digital. He does his own channel with all kinds of cool 3D stuff, and this is involving all 3D artists across the world using any different platform. All you have to do is create an epic 3D world using a very simple template. So most people have 30 days to complete this render challenge, you might call it, but the problem is I have a lot of projects going on right now, and so I have approximately, well, maybe 3 days to complete this. But I'll do my best and we'll see what the coolest thing I can create within a few days is. Now for this video project, I've partnered with Origin PC and NVIDIA Studio. They've built an incredible PC custom tailored for this kind of heavy advanced 3D workflow. As you can see, the people over at Origin PC really know what they're doing, and they built one of the coolest PCs I've ever seen with a ton of attention put to detail. I know for a lot of you, building your own custom PC can be really scary because you need a lot of know-how, plus you need to keep up to date on all of the latest hardware. So if you want to focus more on the skills that you love doing with art and creativity or gaming, leave it to the professionals at Origin PC to build you an NVIDIA Studio desktop custom tailored for your specific workflows and to fit your budget. The PC I have here is perfect for what I do on the channel. They've equipped it with the latest gen Threadripper 3970X, a 32-core processor, along with NVIDIA's RTX 3090 with the studio drivers already installed, so it's ready to go in Blender. It's going to render super fast with optics, so I can immediately jump into my 3D workflows now and know that I'm going to have a stable, fast experience. If you're in need of a new PC and want something custom built exactly for your workflows, check out Origin PC with the link in the description. And just a quick note, I'm removing myself from being eligible to win this contest. There's a lot of incredible prizes that I'm already lucky enough to have access to, so I don't want to take those from someone that could benefit from them more. Not that I would win anyways, because there's going to be some amazing entries that I probably can't compete with, but just putting that out there, I won't be winning. So now that we know that we don't have like any time at all, we have to jump right straight into it. My idea for this project was sort of a fantasy, whoa, lighting is getting kind of dark, kind of spooky. Come on, turn the lights back on, God. So my idea for this project was sort of a fantasy world with a bunch of floating islands just like with their own gravity in the background of the scene. Thought that would be pretty cool. So as always, what I first did is jumped on the internet and grabbed a reference from everywhere I could find it, thrown it all into one file so I could reference it easily on a separate screen as I'm creating my world. And then I just started blocking out the shapes of where I sort of imagined these being. Before I put much detail into it, I want to make sure that the layout is going to kind of work the way I imagined it. So once I was happy with some of the placements for these floating islands, I need to start actually creating some high resolution geometry. So my idea for this was actually to use Blender's mountain landscape generator by enabling that in the add-ons, and then I'd tweak these settings to kind of be the inverse of a mountain, so I had a chunk of earth more or less hanging down than coming up. And I was able to play around with these settings and make a preset that looked pretty cool for some random chunks of earth. So then I started creating variations of these chunks of earth until I had a variety of them to choose from, and then I started placing them in my scene as floating islands. I also had to generate a second landscape then for the top of the island, and then do my best to sort of just cut them out roughly to match the same shape. It's not very pretty if you get close, but these are distant islands, and I don't have time to be pretty, so we just went ahead with whatever worked. And then I needed some materials for these mountains. And I wanted a material that was really sort of earthy with like rocks and roots and stuff that was just like pulled out of the ground and is now its own floating planet with its own gravity. So what I did is I started using PBR materials from ccotextures.com, an awesome place for free textures, by the way. And I would just combine these different PBR materials using the pointiness node as a mix factor between two of them. This would allow me to have rocks on the edges, more sharp points of the mesh, and dirt sort of tucked away in the crevices, more or less. I also then used the ambient occlusion node in cycles to create another mask to add in another layer of rock just for some more variation on these hanging planets. But now I was going to need a lot of detail in this scene, and I wasn't gonna have the time to model it by hand, so I turned to photo scanning, something I've done a few times on the channel. And what some of you guys might not know is with the latest iPhone, there is a LiDAR scanner on the back of it, and using this, it's really easy to create 3D scans with just your phone in a matter of seconds. So with my phone and camera in hand, I set out on a quick journey to find some cool vegetation and rocks to photo scan for this scene. So I used the free 3D scanner app off the App Store, and essentially all you have to do is slowly walk walk around your object while basically recording a video in the app, and is capturing all of the geometry data along with the textures and stuff for you, and processes it all right on the phone. So it's really handy for those quick and dirty scans. I also brought my DSLR camera though for the high resolution photo scans that would be used in the foreground, closer to the camera where I need more detail in these. But after a while of photo scanning weird rocks and tree thingies, I started getting eaten alive by bugs and started questioning my sanity. Yeah, it was not pretty. So something had to happen, and it was no more photo scanning. But all in all, I think it was a successful trip as I got some good data that would work well for photo scanning. And day 2 was to process all of that data that we got now. So I was using multiple pieces of software to process these photo scans, starting with Mushroom, the free open source option for photo scanning. It's really just as simple as dragging your images into the photo scanning app and clicking go if you just want the default settings, which are actually quite good. Now, photo scanning is quite resource heavy on a computer, so luckily with the 32 core Threadripper CPU there and the RTX 3090, it was going to process these things really fast. And actually, because you have a supercomputer, you might as well put it to the test. So I also fired up Reality Capture and started photo scanning assets through that application at the same time. So I was processing 2 photo scans at once, and of course it screamed through these and processed them extremely fast. So after a little bit of cleanup data though, you can see that we actually got some pretty cool photo scans here now in Blender. The ones captured with the iPhone should work well for the distant models and maybe particle systems, and the more high resolution ones captured with the DSLR are definitely going to be the ones I put close to the camera. But with these photo scans now, I can start placing objects in my scene, kind of seeing where they fit well to frame the shot the way I sort of imagined it, and just going about placing these photo scans and rotating them at different angles to try and make it seem like I'm not using the same photo scanned assets over and over again, which I totally was, until I felt like I had a pretty cool rocky looking terrain that would work well for a floating island ground. Some of the routes then that I photo scanned that looked actually really cool, and I was impressed with how well Reality Capture photo scan is. I'm gonna have to say that as good as Mushroom is for free, it's amazing. I think Reality Capture is about 10 to maybe 15% better at processing photo scans like this. It just captured way more detail than I even expected it to, so it was pretty cool. I was able to use some of the tree roots that I photo scanned as a particle system on some of these floating islands. Adding this particle system along with some weight painting to put them right in the crevices, it just gave it more of an organic look where it actually looked like a chunk of dirt that was just hanging there in the sky with like roots hanging out, and thought it was kind of cool, I guess. So starting with particles on literally everything. I don't think you could ever overdo particle systems when you're creating a nature scene, because the more assets you keep throwing at your scene, the better it's gonna look. I'm starting with some grass assets that I made actually back in my Bob Ross 3D world, where I just modeled some grass blades and created a few assets for grass. I added a particle system to my ground using these grass assets, and then I just painted in with the weight paint mode where I wanted them. And I was kind of using the grass actually to hide all of the mistakes that you can see in certain areas on the photo scans, just making it blend better into the ground mesh. So I went ahead and I used some of the rock photo scans then that I captured with my phone as another particle system to give it sort of that real rocky, mountainous looking landscape. Now at this point I needed my lighting. I ended up trying a million different HDRs for lighting on the scene, just until I finally found that one that I felt like fit the mood for the scene. And I was getting these from HDR Haven, the coolest place online for HDRs, by the way. So if you're ever creating a scene in 3D and you're having difficulties with it, try a different HDR, because it might sort of change the entire perspective you have on the scene. It's really important. Now day 3 was pretty much just pure panic because there was a lot to get done, not a lot of time to do it. Now we needed some trees, and because this was a fantasy world, I didn't want just all basic trees, so I created some pink and purple trees, because that's fantasy, right? Right. That's fantasy, right? To create these trees, I used the sapling add-on built into Blender, tweaking some of the settings in the add-on to give it more of a fantasy sort of hanging tree that maybe is in blossom, or maybe it just has purple leaves, who really knows? And then I added some really big leaves, and the reason I added really big leaves is because I was actually going to use a branch as a texture, because this will render a whole lot faster than individual leaves, and then I just put it in the scene. As you can see, like right there. I don't know what I'm saying. Now, I'm on my last day that I have to spend on this project, and I still have a naked character. So I'm not panicking, but I definitely don't have time to create a complete character from scratch at this point. So luckily I was able to do a little searching online and find a Mixamo character that would work okay for the scene, sort of like a Tomb Raider-like looking character that would kind of fit in a fantasy world. So I was able to take that model and adjust the rig that came with the scene to fit the new character, and mapped the new data to that, messing with the animation just a little bit with the arms and a little head glance to check out those cool islands in the background. Then I wanted to add a little extra life to the character. So using some weight paints, I created a new group for a cloth simulation, which I was able to then use the fabric simulator in Blender to add a little bit of extra movement to the character's clothing and hair to make it seem a little bit more alive, and like there was some maybe higher winds up here on this epic fantasy island chunk of ground. But at this point I was thinking, wouldn't it be like really cool if there was like an epic waterfall coming down off of one of these floating islands in the background? And so I thought maybe I could like somehow simulate that or do some advanced smoke simulation. And then I realized I was on my last day and I had not a chance of doing that. So I turned to a method that I used in the past. It actually works really great and it's super cheaty, but I love it, so I did it anyways. And that's find some epic video footage of one of the coolest waterfalls in the world. This one is Angel Falls, and then taking that into Premiere and crushing the black so I can create a mask of just that falling water. And then I could just import that into Blender as an animated sequence on a plane, and I just use that as a mask to mix some translucency and diffuse materials together, along with a little glossy to get what looks like some falling water. Also a little bit of bump mapping to make it look less flat, and it was actually pretty cool looking then in the background of my scene. And now we needed some volumetrics. Now volumetrics are really slow to render in 3D graphics, unless you have a supercomputer, as we happen to have here. And with the NVIDIA RTX 3090, volumetric rendering is accelerated greatly, making a render like this possible in a short amount of time, which is awesome because I wanted a lot of volumetrics in this scene. So I created some fluffy little clouds using a simple shader node setup. I actually copied this material from a YouTuber that I saw online. I think it was like CG Don't Matter or something, I don't remember. But just creating these fluffy little clouds in a basic cube, I was able to then create variations of this cube and just duplicate a million of them across my scene, putting them around the base of the islands to give them more of a sense of scale. I also wanted some higher resolution clouds though, so I used another cheating method that I've used in the past, and that's find some alpha masked clouds online. And I use these again as a mask similar to the water material on a plane. So I was able to use this as a black and white image to mix in some translucency along with transparency to make just a fadey sort of more detailed cloud that I could then add a little bit of geometry to using a displacement modifier, and then placing these on a plane with a particle system. I could just duplicate that plane and add more of these sort of distant, more detailed clouds in front of the islands to add a little bit of extra spice to the scene. I then wanted some blossoms sort of flying around the scene and sitting on the floor to add more of that fantasy aspect to the scene. So what I did is I found a flower texture from textures.com. This is really cool because all of the geometry is using just a displacement map. So I was able to just cut out these flowers off of this plane, and with the material slapped on it, with a little bit of displacement in cycles, I was able to add the geometry right to it without having to do any modeling. Then you guessed it, it was just another particle system to throw these all around the trees and on some of my photoscanned assets to make it look more organic and blend everything together. And then I also did sort of a cool curvature, windy thing of floating blossom leaves because fantasy. So then I started thinking, what can I do to really just push this scene over the edge for extra detail, because Clint said that detail is important in this contest. So of course I grabbed a texture of a fly and I created a 3D model of this fly. I zoomed in real close on my floating island and I stuck that fly right on one of those hanging roots because, you know, details. And then it was just tweaking and throwing more details and more tweaking and throwing more details and adding little sort of hanging vines here and there and a little bit of a hanging bridge connecting two of the different islands, and basically as much as I could fit in as short of amount of time as possible. Now I was thinking, like, what is it missing? That's it, more bugs. So I comped in a little bit of extra bug footage around the character's head because we all know that bugs exist. But then I really needed some extra atmospheric fog for a sense of scale to the scene. So I created a cube that I fit all of the assets into the scene with, and I gave it a very small amount of volumetric density, along with some anastrophe. This just gave it that extra sense of depth and scale, and is really important for a scene like this. Volumetrics can be slow, but when you have a supercomputer with optics rendering, you just throw all of the stuff at it and it can handle it. But now it was time to render. So I enabled a little bit of subtle motion blur, not going too crazy with this, but just as the camera is moving, a little bit of motion blur adds a little bit of realism, along with a little bit of depth of field to the camera, not too much again, because you don't want the scene to seem small, but as long as you have it there just a touch, it will seem a little bit more realistic. Now 1080 HD is the minimum requirement for rendering the scene for the contest, but we kind of have a supercomputer, so 4K maybe. And you know what? Forget it, go big or go home. We're rendering this at 8K with some optics denoising, and we can only get away with this because, of course, we're rendering it on that NVIDIA Studio RTX 3090. A quick tip that I learned a while ago is when you're using denoising like optics denoising in Blender, it is better to go more resolution and less samples because you get a lot more detail in your scene as the AI denoiser has more information to work with. So cut your samples in half if you have to and boost the resolution up higher for the best results. So rendering this at 8K took about 13.5 minutes or so per scene, but after slapping on a sick looking color grade in Adobe Premiere, the scene was finally completed. The scene was finally completed. The scene was finally completed. We were finally finished. It was done. It was ready to go. Bada bing, bada boom. And so here is what we did. This was a really fun project to do. I've already been seeing a ton of incredible entries, but these contests are amazing and actually something I've thought about doing on the channel. If you guys think I should host one myself, let me know because these things really encourage artists to do things out of their comfort zone, create something really cool, and like this is something I would have probably never created if it wasn't for the contest. So thanks Clint for hosting the contest. I love seeing the whole 3D community coming together online to create something awesome. And thanks again to Origin PC for building an NVIDIA Studio custom built PC. Super epic looking. It's gonna look amazing on my desk back there, and it's going to create projects so much faster, so I'm excited to continue using it. But that's gonna do it for me, guys. Hope you enjoyed the video. Subscribe for more fun, and I'll see you when I'm done. That doesn't make sense.